The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's a similarity between Donald Trump and Jordan Peterson that I want to talk about today. There might be more than one similarity between Donald Trump and Jordan Peterson, but I want to talk about a specific similarity today. And let me sort of give a disclaimer before I jump into this. I know that some people in our audience don't like it when I talk about Jordan Peterson. I also know that some people in the audience don't like it when I talk about Donald Trump. But bear with me, because this isn't so much about Jordan Peterson specifically, or Donald Trump even specifically, but it's about a connection between voters and masculinity and certain male figures in society. And it's always sort of outlined in a Washington Post article, which goes right along with much of what we've been saying on the program about masculinity and gender, and both Donald Trump and Jordan Peterson. And the similarity is that both Trump and Peterson appeal to men who are insecure with their masculinity. Now, I'm going to defend this, okay? Jordan Peterson does many things, but one thing that he does for insecure men is he gives them cover to blame other things for their lack of success. It could be lack of economic success. It could be lack of sexual success, whatever. He gives them things other than themselves to blame. And in this vein, Donald Trump does something that is quite similar. You might think that when Donald Trump does his displays of masculinity, bragging about his penis size, making fun of people, saying some women just aren't good looking enough for him to have wanted to sexually assault them, bullying people in the media, whatever example you want, right? Your first instinct might be, oh, he's appealing to strong masculine men. But the Washington Post did a very interesting study and found that actually that stuff appeals more to men who are insecure about their masculinity by giving them a way to feel like they are more masculine by their support of Donald Trump and his antics, or Jordan Peterson and his explanations for some of the failings of certain men, not all men, of course. And it really makes a lot of sense. If you're actually secure in your masculinity, you don't need to try to reinforce that masculinity by supporting someone like Trump or by buying into Jordan Peterson's explanations for why you aren't doing well in the world. We're going to address something that kind of relates to this on the Friday show in audience questions about the use of the term no homo to reinforce one's heterosexual masculine credentials, so to speak. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What the Washington Post study revealed is that people in red parts of the country are searching for things like how to get girls, testosterone, erectile dysfunction, penis size, hair loss, much more than people in blue areas. The more searches for erectile dysfunction a place had, the more strongly they supported Donald Trump, even after adjustments were made for education and race and other demographic attributes. The correlation remained. Now, you might say, well, maybe there's just something about blue versus red, Democrat versus Republican. Wrong, because the same correlation didn't apply to support for Mitt Romney in 2012 or to support for John McCain in 2008, the two most recent non-Trump presidential Republican candidates. So let's get all the caveats out of the way. First of all, correlation is not causation. I say correlation is not causation when a study lines up with my worldview, and I say correlation is not causation when a study doesn't line up with my worldview. Those whose masculinity is more fragile aren't necessarily voting for Trump because of that, but it is a correlation. Now, there's another possible problem here, which you might point out, which is hair loss is a problem more common in older people. Erectile dysfunction is a problem more common in older people? Republicans are older, so couldn't that be the explanation? And the answer is, of course, no, because the study says that age was adjusted for, and the age element only applies to some searches. Yes, on average, it's probably older people making internet searches about hair loss and erectile dysfunction. But penis size is not a search that would be explained away in the aggregate based on age. So a couple of the attempts to debunk this are just not based on the reality of the math and of the data. But there are some really interesting other ways that we are seeing this trend. Remember that a great indicator for supporting Trump was fear of losing status. And for the broader population, it was economic status, right? The fear of losing some kind of actual or perceived privileged status in society. That strongly correlated with support for Donald Trump in 2016. We're basically talking about the same thing here. Hair loss and erectile dysfunction, not getting girls, as the searches suggest. These are ways, Pat, in which men can feel that they are losing status in society, not being able to perform sexually, balding, being involuntarily celibate. This is a series of attributes that, like maybe people feared would happen if Hillary Clinton won, which is why they voted for Trump, these are indicators that can make men feel as though they might lose some kind of privileged status. And it is interesting that it is yet another study that it's looking at a different set of data, but it's coming to that same conclusion.
Well, luckily, I'm so incredibly manly and secure in my masculinity that this isn't really a problem for me. I'm not susceptible to falling for people like Jordan Peterson and Donald Trump. But seriously, though, this kind of reminded me of Kanye West's unhinged Oval Office rantings when he talked about how he lives in like a female-dominated environment, living with the Kardashians, and when he puts on that MAGA hat, he feels like a superhero. He feels more manly. I think that's going on with a lot of people right now.
Yeah, there's no question at this point that when we talk about, economic anxieties of the Midwestern working class or whatever, these are sort of regional explanations for what the 2016 results were. But there is this big picture that there is a significant contingent of the electorate on the male side that's sort of mesmerized by images of hypermasculinity. We wondered why Trump's various affairs, his sexual assault allegations didn't hurt him. If you are struggling with your own masculinity, you might be more attracted to a candidate who sexually assaults women and has affairs because you're impressed that those are even things he's able to accomplish. Send me your thoughts. I definitely want to hear from the audience about this. And I know I'm going to get a lot of angry messages about this one as well. Let's talk a little bit about voter fraud and voter suppression. We've been talking for years at this point about how the right claims voter fraud is the problem with elections, meaning people showing up and voting twice, voting for dead people, all sorts of antics happening in person, whereas people who understand reality have been saying, actually, it's election fraud that's the problem. It's voter suppression that's the problem. Voter fraud is really rare. It's mostly Republicans trying to prove how easy it is to do it and getting caught. Voter suppression, on the other hand, is rampant. Reductions in voting hours, reductions in polling places, voter IDs, voter purges from voter rolls, very, very long list. We finally have a story about really serious voter suppression. We found an example finally, and it's Republicans in North Carolina. And it's important to point out that I'm colloquially calling this, we finally found the voter fraud that Republicans are talking about. Strictly speaking, this is actually election fraud because voter fraud as fear-mongered by Republicans basically doesn't exist. And the story goes to North Carolina's 9th District, where Republican Mark Harris supposedly defeated the Democratic opponent, Dan McCready, by 905 votes out of 280,000 votes cast. The Board of Elections, however, decided not to certify Harris's win because of suspicious voter suppression that they noticed. They noticed that in some counties, the Republican won really a strangely high portion of the mail-in absentee ballots, and the results were drastically different than in other counties. The numbers just really didn't make sense. There are now allegations that are hopefully going to be investigated, which are just stunning. Number one, People are claiming that that people showed up at their door saying, "I'm here to collect your absentee ballot." And in fact, Ginger Eason has admitted that Leslie McCrae Dowless Jr. paid her between $75 and $100 to pick up completed absentee ballots in the 9th District. She never mailed the ballots, but handed them to Dowless, which is against the law. Multiple people physically handling absentee ballots instead of them being mailed in as they're supposed to be. Dowless has twice been named in sworn affidavits as someone working for the Republican candidate's campaign. Dowless is not denying it. Dowless was asked for comment and said no comment. Also very suspicious. The same people have been signing as witnesses for people voting on absentee ballots. It's just very strange. Why are the same people acting as witnesses for so many voters on their absentee ballots? Unrequested absentee ballots have been arriving at people's houses. Improper election monitoring has been reported at polling places. Unusual coding of absentee ballots. Multiple people have overheard others talking about payments to a local political operative working for the Republican candidate. 538 said, let's run a statistical analysis on the results. And without getting into the full math of it, the percentages of absentee ballots in some counties versus others relative to the portion of all ballots that went for Republicans versus Democrats are making no sense politically, and they're making no sense mathematically. So I don't know what happens next because the election wasn't certified. The North Carolina Republican Party is threatening to sue if the results don't get certified. And it's sort of unclear what happens next. But we found it. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him, Pat. It's election fraud. It's in North Carolina. It's by Republicans. But of course, this isn't the type of fraud that they want to talk about. They want to talk about your neighbor down the street voting 3 times, as if that's even a way to flip an election.
Right. And if people like Donald Trump and Chris Kobach were serious about election integrity, this would be Exhibit A for them. But no, they want to take a look at supposed voter fraud committed by Hispanic people or young people, people likely to vote for Democrats. It's more of a political affiliation thing than anything else.
Republicans finally have themselves a fraudulent voting story, but they don't want to talk about it because it's all them. And I hope that we don't let this go and we actually get to the bottom of it. Send me your thoughts. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. I am on Twitter at dpakman, and I look forward to hearing from you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Big thank you going out today to Mario Lopez, today's new member of the day. I don't think it's the actor from one of my favorite childhood shows, Saved by the Bell. I think it's a different Mario Lopez. But Mario, thank you. Also want to say thanks to Luke Wittig, who is today's sustaining long-term member of the day. He's been with us nearly 5 years. Luke, thank you for your support. Mario, thank you for your support. You can join them by signing up at www.joinpakman.com or by becoming a patron for as little as $1 per month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Donald Trump did something yesterday that he does on most days. He went on Twitter and he tweeted outrageous things, but there was a difference yesterday. Yesterday's tweet caused numerous legal experts to say that the tweet constitutes criminality, specifically witness tampering. Remember how Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, pled guilty and spilled the beans on Trump? Trump didn't like that. So Trump went on Twitter and tried to, as some legal experts are saying, influence the testimony of another Inner Circle member, Roger Stone, who, by the way, has been interviewed on the David Pakman Show before. Donald Trump tweeted yesterday, quote, "I will never testify against Trump. This statement was recently made by Roger Stone, essentially stating that he will not be forced by a rogue and out-of-control prosecutor to make up lies and stories about President Trump." Nice to know that some people still have guts. So what Donald Trump is doing here is praising a witness for not speaking to the special counsel. This is, in a sense, encouraging them to continue not speaking to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. That is arguably a form of witness tampering. In so doing, Donald Trump also is obstructing the progress of the investigation. Robert Mueller would carry out this investigation, speaking to Roger Stone. The president is encouraging Roger Stone not to participate in that. Thus, he is obstructing the pursuit and carrying out of justice. That's the crime, obstruction of justice. You have legal experts from the left and from the right who are saying, yeah, this likely is an illegal attempt to influence the investigation. Even Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway's own husband, George Conway, says this is illegal. He quoted the president's tweet, adding just file under 18 USC subsections 1503 and 1512, which refer to witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I actually think that, listen, it's very unlikely that there's going to be legal consequences to Trump for this. Would be great, but I think it's extraordinarily unlikely. I'm more interested in taking a slightly zoomed out perspective and asking, if Trump is as innocent as he claims to be, why is he praising people for obstructing justice? Why not just tell the truth and get Trump out of trouble with the truth of his complete and total innocence in all of this? And now instead, we have a building list of possible crimes committed by Trump. Again, I understand he's unlikely to ever face consequences for these, but it's a pretty big list. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, perjury, possibly, since it seems very likely that Donald Trump's written answers that he submitted to Robert Mueller directly contradict the testimony of Michael Cohen. And at this point, I tend to believe Michael Cohen over Donald Trump. Cohen has signed a plea deal involving cooperation and truly seems to want the best thing for his family at this point. I have no reason to believe Michael Cohen would be lying to Robert Mueller at this point. And then we have sort of like all the other crimes that don't even relate directly to Donald Trump as president. Money laundering for decade, wire fraud and bank fraud related to all sorts of shady real estate deals with Russians and Saudis. And I maintain, Pat, that Trump is making it way worse for himself because he won't stop tweeting. I don't know if you agree with me, but I've been saying from day one that we would only have a fraction of the legal scenario we have right now if from day one Donald Trump, number one, never tweeted about Trump Russia at all, not a single tweet, and said only, I'm cooperating, I'm confident I will be cleared, I have no reason to interfere, and in the meantime, I'm going to stay busy running the country. Do you agree, Pat, that had he taken that approach, he wouldn't be in nearly as much trouble as he is?
I totally agree. And, you know, there have been those campaigns to kick Donald Trump off of Twitter because he has been involved in some hate speech on there. And I've always been against those campaigns because he does dig himself into bigger holes with all this stuff. I mean, a lot of what we know when it comes to like secondary crimes potentially committed by Trump, obstruction of justice and witness tampering, that stems from his use of Twitter. And I think it only serves the public good.
No question about it. I don't want him to stop tweeting, although I will say that if Twitter wanted to say Trump violates our terms and conditions, he's bullying people, he's doing all sorts of stuff that other people get blocked or banned from Twitter for, I think they would have a perfectly reasonable case to kick Trump off Twitter. I don't want them to do that. I want him to stay on Twitter and keep digging a deeper and deeper hole. Here's a really interesting little clip, by the way, from the right-wing media machine around the Trump investigation. This is from Fox News yesterday. Even on Fox News now, anchors are starting to concede that, you know what, Robert Mueller's Trump Russia investigation might actually have something. And before I play the clip, it's really important just to preface it by reminding you about the goalpost moving that's taken place, right? Early on, Fox News was fully on the there's nothing to investigate and no big investigation is going to take place. That was the first position Fox took. The investigation started. They were then on the there's nothing to find, there's no collusion, this will go nowhere and not last very long bandwagon. Then they moved the goalposts to, okay, if there was collusion, what crime is that anyway? That's not a specific crime. Then they move to, well, okay, there might actually be some ancillary, incidental criminality by people loosely in Trump's circle, but it's not going to have anything to do with the real heart of Trump's campaign. It'll be little technicalities committed by people prior to the campaign that wouldn't even be on the radar of law enforcement were it not for the political attack that is the investigation into Donald Trump. And then we get back to reality. And of course, in reality, we're heading to sentencing for Trump's national security advisor. We're heading to sentencing for Donald Trump's personal lawyer, who was directly involved in the campaign. We're heading to sentencing for Donald Trump's campaign chairman. I'm talking, by the way, about Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, and Paul Manafort. And then we also have lurking in the background Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi, two Trump operatives during the campaign, who believe they're going to be indicted and are negotiating with Robert Mueller, and it's looking really, really bad. It also, by the way, appears that Donald Trump's written answers to Robert Mueller might directly contradict what Michael Cohen, a cooperating witness, has said to Robert Mueller, that Donald Trump Jr.'s testimony might directly contradict what Michael Cohen told prosecutors. So it's getting really bad, and perjury, lying under oath, is now on the table for multiple Trump family members. So now we cut to yesterday. Even on Fox News, they're starting to admit it. Check out this clip where they have this right-winger Matt Schlapp on, who continues to insist that there's just nothing here. And one of the hosts, who goes by Kennedy, says it's starting to get a little weird and Mueller might actually have something.
There's that.
Can I say something very quickly?
Put a pin in it, Kennedy.
There might be something there. There absolutely might be something there. We don't know what Mueller has. He might something. He might have something. Things are starting to seem a little weird. You know what else he might have? He might have something on the dossier. And I hope he does. If they're pinning one aspect of filthy, dirty, disgusting politics cavorting with questionable Russians on one side, they have to do it on the other. But there might be something there.
We will stay tuned. We will see. Hopefully soon.
So you'll notice that she kind of does the both sides thing. She says, okay, Mueller might have something, but he also might have something on that dirty, filthy, immoral dossier, more and more of which, by the way, is confirmed with every passing week. The other funny thing is that this obvious and straightforward admission on Fox News is considered mind-blowing to their audience. Everybody and their mother who can put together a sentence understands that, hey, this has been serious all along. This hasn't been frivolous all along. On Fox News, Pat, it's almost like, oh, wow, they're admitting that the entire investigation might not be a ruse. Like, there might actually be something here. On Fox News, that counts as a monumental admission.
There are also like many conspiratorial elements to that statement, too. It sounds like the QAnon stuff, that Robert Mueller maybe is actually working with Trump and he's going to end up indicting Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. There's no evidence of that, but I think that conspiratorial nature is becoming part and parcel with the Republican Party nowadays.
Well, let me propose along those lines one other idea. This isn't conspiratorial, but it's sort of the idea that starting to concede that this is a real serious investigation is part of a strategy, because we saw Rudy Giuliani say a couple of weeks ago, I think Mueller's report will be devastating to Trump. Kennedy saying, you know, this could be bad. This could be a strategy to start painting a really grim picture so that then when Mueller's report finally does come out, they all go, oh, this is all they had? We've been saying for so long now that it's going to be really bad, but this is all they had? Give me a break. One other note, later in the segment, that Matt Schlapp guy said Mueller has no case, and that all Mueller is doing is, quote, taking the dirt he's gotten on people like Cohen and squeezing them to get everything he can out of them. That's what an investigation is. That's what law enforcement does. They talk to witnesses, they learn more about what people did, and they figure out who else to talk to and who might have committed crimes. Like, Matt Schlapp defends Trump by just saying what an investigation is. Apparently on Fox News, that counts as a serious legal defense of the president and an indictment of the investigation. They're talking to witnesses and using the information they get to make deductions and find more people to talk to. Send me your thoughts. The show is on Instagram at David Pakman Show. I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. follow us both. A lot of behind-the-scenes pictures, viewer comments, a lot of good stuff on there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Stephen Pearlstein, who's a business and economics columnist at the Washington Post. He's also Robinson Professor of Public Affairs at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. His recent book is called Can American Capitalism Survive? Why Greed is Not Good, Opportunity is Not Equal, and Fairness Won't Make Us Poor. Stephen, thanks so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.
The book relates to so much of what we've been talking about on our program and so many of the sort of fundamental economic questions that are increasingly being discussed about the failings and successes of capitalism, social democracy, other economic systems. So maybe you can start just by kind of big picturing it for us. What are the fundamental problems that you see with the economic system we currently have in the United States?
Well, as you know, a lot of young people and even not so young people are sort of down on capitalism these days. And they express some support for something else. They call it socialism. I'm not sure they know exactly what they mean by socialism. But in any case, there's a feeling that our system is not acceptable. And some of that has to do with the economics of it, that we have an economy that, although it's booming and has, been growing fairly well for a while with some interludes, has left a lot of people behind. And so some of the anxiety is economic, and we know about that. But I'd say probably even more is that we have a sense that our system has run off the moral rails, that it's lost its moral legitimacy, that it routinely offends our moral sensibilities. And for the last 30 years, we've been told by people who I might call market fundamentalists that we should ignore our moral instincts. We should ignore these feelings that something's not fair or something's not right, and simply focus on the fact that what matters is growth in GDP. And if you try to do anything about those moral instincts and repulsions that we have, that we're going to kill the goose that lays the egg. And so what I tried to do in this book is go back to a set of ideas which lay behind this notion of ignore your moral sentiments, and re-examine them and find that they basically, while there's a germ of truth in them, that they don't actually hold up to scrutiny.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about the origins of the idea that growth is something to be desired indefinitely, and even something that is used as a sort of yardstick. Because if we think back to hunter-gatherer societies or even early agricultural societies, which were basically looking to create enough food for themselves to survive, sort of a subsistence approach, the idea of growth was only necessary to track the growth of the population and to sort of make sure you had enough food for people, right? So at what point did the idea of growth for the sake of growth become something seen as a goal, a good thing, a virtuous thing?
I'm not sure I can answer that question, David. I mean, people, they lived for most of history, most of people lived a subsistence existence. And it was only at the point of the Industrial Revolution that people began to see that they could actually live much better lives in terms of what they had, that not only the food they had, but the health and the housing and the clothing and the other parts of life that could be improved. And we've in general been on an upward trend ever since then in the industrial world. And I think we can pretty much all agree that having rising standard of living is a good thing. And the way we in general have got rising standard of living is that the pie has grown, and as the pie grows, each of our slice of the pie grows. They may grow a little bit unequally, but because there is some growth, all of us do better today than we did before, or that our parents did before, and that has been pretty much the American story since people landed on these shores.
So I'll get sort of my economic views out there just so the audience is kind of reminded of them, and you know where I sort of am. I find that a lot of the language you use, such as there's a sort of germ of truth in many of the talking points, but you need to contextualize them, or we need to have competition, but it needs to be controlled competition. Basically, that all gets me to social democracy. I think that having private ownership of businesses is okay. I am not for Stalinist communism and government ownership of industry, but I think that those germs of truth have been allowed to sort of fester unmitigated, uncontrolled, in a way that has become destructive. That's sort of my view on the germs of truth from capitalism's talking points. Can you give me sort of your perspective on that?
Well, that's my perspective too, and we'll have to explore whether we agree about all the details of it. But let's take one idea, which is that greed is good. That started out as something of a joke in a movie, but in fact, it did become the sort of rallying cry for a generation in the 1980s, and it becomes this sort of symbolic way that a lot of critics think of American capitalism today. Now, of course, there's a germ of truth that I'm sure you understand, and most people understand, that a market system depends on ambition and self-interest. Everyone trying in his own or her own way to improve his own standing, his own welfare, and what he has, what their income is. And if everyone does that in a sort of selfish way, as Adam Smith reminded us, then in fact, not only is each individual better off, but all individuals are better off, and the economy is better off, and the society is better off. That's the invisible hand. We are led as if by an invisible hand to a better place. Well, that's true, but you can take that sort of thing so far. And Adam Smith also said in another book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, that in fact you have to do that in a context where people treat each other fairly, in which the fruits of everyone's labor is divided not only according to their contribution, but somewhat fairly, so that nobody is living in poverty, that people need to trust each other and not behave in a ruthless manner, because if you do behave in a ruthless manner, then the system doesn't work so well, and that we all have a natural instinct, in fact, not only to do well, but to be respected and to be liked, and you have to behave in a certain way in order to be respected and to be liked. So it's a sort of nuanced thing. Yes, we all have a selfish gene, but we all have a cooperative gene. We all have an empathetic gene, and they compete with each other to control our behavior. And if any one or the other gets out of hand, then our economic system doesn't work too well.
Yeah, what's interesting about greed is good, to stick with that one for a little bit, since it's a good one. We seem to have, there's a lot of polarization in general when we talk about politics, economics, etc. But in this particular case, I'm talking about polarization that leads people to one of two extremes. One is humans are greedy, and therefore the correct system is one where humans are just allowed to be as greedy as they want to be. They're allowed to take as much as they are able to take based on force or whatever else. The other side of that can sometimes be greed is so bad that we need the government to take over industry to prevent that greed from playing any role. And it seems so obvious to me that the path that benefits the most people in the greatest way is, let's, first of all, instead of calling it greed, let's consider it human self-interest, and let's create a system that allows the positive sides of ambition and self-interest to manifest while ensuring that nobody is getting left behind. That middle path seems to me to be the one that is almost like evolutionarily logical, but politically speaking, you don't really hear about it as much as some of the extremes.
No, you don't, and it is evolutionary required, because as a species, the reason we're at the top of the food chain is because more than any other species, although others do too, we learn to cooperate.
Right.
And that allows us, we started out cooperating as a family unit, protect our children. Then we became tribal. And if we cooperated within the tribe, we survived and maybe we killed, or at least we were protected from other tribes. And then we widened the circle more and more. And the more we widen the circle of cooperation, the better we did as a species, and the better countries do when they are cooperative, when people do trust each other. And capitalism requires that. Democracy requires that. And we've lost. I think everyone agrees, a level of trust and cooperation in the United States, and we see that in political dysfunction. And in my opinion, we also see it in a slowing of growth.
What are, or let me phrase it a different way, are there good examples in your mind of countries that are over-regulating in a way where development is being stifled? Like, I don't think the United States is one of those examples. In fact, I think in the United States, we have many problems from lack of regulation.
Right.
Are there good examples of what too much regulation looks like?
Yes. France. And particularly France of 20 years ago, or Germany 20 years ago. Probably Italy falls in that category. Those places have got the balance slightly wrong. You use the word regulation. I think we have to add to regulation in your formulation, regulation and things that equalize incomes. In other words, if you make things too equal, kibbutz, communism, you lose the ambition, innovative, creative side of things, and your economy becomes less vibrant. Sweden is an example, I think, of probably a country that has got a good balance these days. For Sweden, I don't mean to say that we all have to be like Swedes or Denmark, but they used to be much more regulatory, much more progressive in their tax and transfer system, and they realized that their country was losing out in terms of innovation and creativity, and they pulled back on that, and now they've got a better balance. We probably went too far the other way.
Let's pause our conversation there. This is a good place to pause with Stephen Pearlstein, whose recent book is Can American Capitalism Survive? Why Greed is Not Good, Opportunity is Not Equal, and Fairness Won't Make us poor. We will pick up our conversation with him tomorrow, where we'll focus in a little more on specific economic policies. Stephen, thank you.
Great to be with you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
In a completely kind of random turn of events, Donald Trump, the guy who's all about military spending, is now saying that our military spending is crazy. That's a quote. After complaining for so long about President Obama being weak on the military, about President Obama not spending enough on the military, Donald Trump tweeted yesterday that too much is being spent on the military, saying, quote, "I am certain that at some time in the future, President Xi and I, together with President Putin of Russia, will start talking about a meaningful halt to what has become a major and uncontrollable arms race. The United States spent $716 billion this year." Crazy. Now, there's a few layers to this that I want to talk about. The first being that Donald Trump previously bragged about how he's spending more on the military and talked about how great it is that he's doing that. One example from Twitter, Trump saying, quote, "Because of the $716 billion gotten to rebuild our military, many jobs are created and our military is again rich. Building a great border wall with drugs, poison, and enemy combatants pouring into our country is all about national defense. Build wall through military." One other example from Donald Trump, where he said, quote, got $1.6 billion to start wall on southern border. Rest will be forthcoming. Most importantly, got $700 billion to rebuild our military. $716 billion next year, most ever. Had to waste money on Dem giveaways in order to take care of military pay increase and new equipment. Trump proposed spending $716 billion on the military in February. Trump bragged about how great it is to be spending $716 billion on the military. And now he's denouncing that we're spending $716 billion on the military. So there's a few hypotheses here. Number one is cognitive decline. Just plain and simple evidence of cognitive decline. Number two, this is Trump getting erratic because he's so afraid as the walls close in around him based on everything that we've been talking about on the program leading up to today. Number three hypothesis is that something happened at the G20 in Argentina. Someone at the G20 suggested to him that he say this, or suggested to him that maybe this is something he could work on with Putin in the future. Like maybe it was Putin himself who said to Trump, you know, it's really crazy how the United States is spending so much money on the military. And then all of a sudden, Donald Trump tweets about it because it definitely seems like this is an idea that would come from somebody like Vladimir Putin. Trump criticizing military budget increases while enacting and bragging about and cheering military budget increases. Trump increased the military budget by nearly 25% in 2 years. And now he says that the military budget is out of control. This may be sort of like a childlike solipsism. There's this term object permanence. This is like when a little kid covers their eyes. They sometimes don't understand that just because they cover their eyes and they can no longer see you, you can still see them. And this relates to the psychological concept of object permanence. Things still exist even when you can't see them or you can't perceive them. It's almost, Pat, like some deranged adult version that is manifesting where Trump says, hey, I'll just talk about how military spending is out of control and nobody will be able to see the fact that I've been tweeting and bragging about military spending for the last couple of years.
Well, it certainly doesn't make sense from a contradiction standpoint for him to say that. But also, he's making it sound as though we're spending $716 billion and Russia and China are right behind us, that they're right in there with the arms race. Not at all. I mean, we always hear about how the U.S. spends more than the next 8 countries in defense spending combined or the next 10 countries in defense spending combined. I don't really understand what the impetus was for this tweet. I mean, maybe it does have to do with the G20, but like you could have said this all along.
That's what's very strange about it. And it's the timing that is making me wonder what the hell is going on. And along those lines, I have sort of like one more hypothesis to present to you, which is a little bit more involved than the ones I've mentioned so far. Let's imagine that Donald Trump realizes that at some point he's going to have to make a call about whether the United States gets involved in Ukraine or not. Because as you may remember, Russia's aggression against Ukraine has been increasing. They rammed a Ukrainian Navy vessel. They took and haven't returned, at least as at the last time that I looked, some Ukrainian Navy sailors. Almost every other Western country has come out in defense of Ukraine. If you're Trump and you are realizing that at some point you might have to say, we're going to get involved with our allies in defending Ukraine or we're not, what about the possibility of laying the groundwork now for saying, you know what? We can't afford to get involved to help Ukraine because we're spending so much on the military, just like I tweeted after the G20. Is that type of forethought possible for Trump?
I think so. And, you know, this is why he takes every possible position on every possible issue, because people can just pick and choose his comments. Well, here he said that he wants more defense spending, and here he says he wants less defense spending. So you can just pick and choose what fits your political ideology, and that's what his supporters do.
To be super clear, I agree with Trump that military spending is out of control. I don't want to pretend like all of a sudden now that Trump says it, it's not what I believe. I agree with him. It's just he's almost always tweeting the opposite of this sentiment, and I'm trying to figure out what is it that's going on here. What do you think is going on? Let me know. I want to hear from you. Let's talk about ICE. ICE is frozen water, but ICE, the abbreviation, also is a federal agency. It's part of the Department of Homeland Security, and it stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This agency called ICE was formed under George W. Bush, and they exist to enforce immigration law, to investigate criminal activity by foreign nationals in the U.S., to investigate terrorist activity by foreign nationals in the United States. But there is now a lawsuit against ICE for allegedly holding an American-born United States citizen who has only been out of the country one time to Jamaica on a cruise vacation. I'm talking about a man named Peter Sean Brown. Peter Sean Brown was born in Philadelphia, and he claims that he ended up in an ICE detention center in Miami. And he explained when he first had contact with police in Monroe County that he's American, he was born in the United States, and he claims that he was threatened with deportation to a Jamaican prison. Peter Sean Brown is now suing the Monroe County Sheriff, alleging he was illegally detained and that he was incorrectly sent to an ICE detention center. He, back in April, turned himself into police for a parole violation. Officers sent information about him to ICE. This is something that some police departments do, some police departments opt not to do. And ICE responded to the Monroe County Sheriffs with what's called a detainer request, which allows them to have Peter Sean Brown held until they can pick him up. He was then transferred from police to a detention center in Miami. Brown claims that he repeatedly said, "I'm an American citizen." He offered to produce proof that he's an American citizen. He claims that the sheriff's office held him so that ICE could take him and eventually deport him to Jamaica. It is now believed that the jail's own records listed Brown as a U.S. citizen, and yet they still held him, allegedly, for ICE to pick him up and send him to a Miami detention center. He eventually was released when a friend of his sent a copy of his birth certificate to ICE, and the complaint says that were it not for Brown's friend sending that birth certificate, he would have ended up deported to Jamaica, where he has never lived and where he doesn't know anybody. Now, a couple different things to mention. Number one, this actually isn't that rare. There's an LA Times investigation, which we talked about when it was new, which says that 1,400 U.S. citizens have been held by ICE since 2012. Now, there are people on the internet lawyers, as I like to call them, saying the only thing we can really criticize ICE for here is that they should have given him a chance to prove his citizenship earlier in the process. And to you, I say, wrong. That is not how anything in our justice system works. ICE has to prove that this man is not a citizen. But this is the problem. A ton of police departments around the country will simply hold people for ICE without any proof of any wrongdoing. And often it takes place for really long periods of time. So, Pat, when the right says sanctuary cities are just law-breaking liberals who have disregard for the law, who are protecting murderers and rapists. No, sanctuary cities are cities that say actually some pretty conservative things. Sanctuary cities say we don't have to do the federal government's job for them. They can make the case against people. They can come and find these people. We're not doing ICE's job for them. We're not collaborating. And every time a Republican makes you think that the sanctuary city, Pat, is a way to protect murderers or rapists, what they're really saying is, let the federal government do their job. We're not participating.
And in this case, it happened to an American citizen. It could happen to someone like you or someone like me. And how terrifying would it be to be deported to a country that you didn't know, or that you didn't know that as your home anyway? I mean, I guess Jamaica wouldn't be so bad, but if I was sent to like Russia or, I don't know, somewhere where I'm not going to be treated too well, or I don't like the climate, that's not going to be very good.
Yes, how dare you subject Pat to weather that he doesn't like? First world problems, I guess is what we call them. So listen, number one, this is just one story I'm bringing you, but we're talking about more than 1,000 cases of this in the last 6 years. Number two, don't allow the right to succeed in their mischaracterization of what it means to be a sanctuary city as some kind of un-American progressive disaster or fiasco, because that's not what it is. And number three, while I've questioned the sort of, I don't know, intelligence or cleverness of including the abolishment of ICE in democratic platforms, it's definitely an institution whose value I question. We have a Department of Homeland Security, and we just have disaster after disaster being perpetrated by this agency. Send me your thoughts. I want to hear from you. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. We got a voicemail from the Eggman. We haven't heard from the Eggman for a little bit. He commented on yesterday on the bonus show. We covered the story of the sexual impropriety allegations against beloved astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson. Eggman says he was surprised I covered it. Take a listen to this.
Hey, Dave. So I'm listening to your show, and I'm starting to think, liberal Dave, my buddy, is not going to mention the Neil deGrasse Tyson controversy of the women that accused him. And then you did on the bonus show, and it just shows that you have equal respect and disrespect for both sides, and respect for women and disrespect for men who don't, and also respect for evidence to see if it's actually true. Sorry for calling him Neil deGrasse Tyson, but it just comes out so easily and obvious. You know, it doesn't sound like it was really that bad either, but I'm glad you addressed it. So, hello, brother.
Yeah. Eggman, I am upset, actually, that the Eggman would even assume that I would not cover allegations against prominent leftists or scientists, or I don't even know if Neil deGrasse Tyson identifies as a leftist. He seems pretty liberal to me. But we have no history on this show, Pat, of pretending that allegations against the left aren't credible, whereas allegations against the right are. I mean, like I said yesterday on the bonus show, these are serious allegations against Neil deGrasse Tyson. The fact that I think he's a good science communicator doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore any of the allegations. And like Carl Sagan's widow, Ann Druyan, said, this is serious. We believe in evidence, and we have to follow the evidence. When it comes to Anthony Weiner, when it comes to Al Sharpton, whoever, I will evaluate the scope and seriousness of allegations, but we have no track record at all of ignoring allegations like these against the left.
Well, I have to correct the record on a couple things here. One, you said that the Eggman hasn't called in a while. That's not true. We actually took a question from him last week about what we want our last meal to be if we were going to be executed. And the other thing is, I pick about 90% of the stories for the bonus show, and that one was one of my choosing. Now, I'm not saying that you would have ignored the story altogether. We probably would have covered it by now. But I am the reason why we talked about Neil deGrasse Tyson on yesterday's bonus show.
That's right. In my defense, I had the story on my list of possible stories for the regular show. Didn't get to it yesterday. Pat had it on the bonus show, and I decided rather than delay it a day, we would talk about it yesterday on the bonus show. But it was Pat's suggestion. But listen, Pat, if I was trying to obfuscate, I would have just said, let's do a different story.
Of course. And we've talked about Al Franken and Anthony Weiner and other prominent left-wing figures who have been taken down by the Me Too allegations.
Yeah, so Eggman, give me a little bit of credit. And apologies, I completely forgot that. You're right, Pat. We did take a question from the Eggman last week. It was such a wacky one that it went completely out of my mind right away. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Membership Patreon. Membership Patreon. Those are the two ways to get access to the bonus show. I'll speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.